Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer from the Department of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of the program. With me are two regular viewmeisters. On my left is Don Cooney. Don is a professor in the School of Social Work at Western and also serves as a Kalamazoo City Commissioner, running for re-election this fall.
That's right.
And on my right is Felix Brooks. Felix is an adjunct professor at Western Michigan University in the Criminal Justice Program, and he also is the Officer of Diversity and Inclusion at Kalamazoo Valley Community College.
Correct.
So, gentlemen, welcome back to another edition
Thank you, Ron.
of our
Thanks.
program.
Good to be here.
The critical issue that we want to focus on this particular time around is the issue of refugees in Europe, migration, the plight of undocumenteds here in the United States. And eventually we want to get back to the issue of climate change and how it's going to aggravate the situation of refugees. We'll have climate refugees.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with the situation in Europe. What we have there is a humanitarian crisis unfolding. As the civil war in Syria deepens, there are many, many refugees. I think the estimate that I saw is around 4 million displaced people in the Middle East. And of course, many of these people are fleeing, trying to come across the Mediterranean to make it to Europe, hopefully to get to Germany. That's the plan for many of them.
Germany and Great Britain.
We've had, it seems, about 300,000 people so far. There are many more to follow. Unfortunately, the tragic part of all of this is that over 2,000 of these people have perished in this effort to try to cross because they often go across in very unsafe seacraft. And of course, I think all of us were horrified by the photograph of the young boy, the 3-year-old Alan Kurdi, I believe was his name. And it really hit me hard as a grandfather, having 2 young grandsons. One of my grandsons is close to that age. And it seemed that one photograph had a real huge impact around the world to somehow humanize the plight of the Syrian refugees and bring this to the world's attention. So, Felix, let's start with you. What's your take on what's happening? What we would like to do is to talk about some of the causes of the refugee crisis, and then look at, and again, to some extent, how Europe is responding or not responding.
Not responding, yeah.
What's your take on?
It's a very tragic unfolding of events that goes all the way back to our involvement and other countries' involvement in the Syrian civil war, and without any thought of what the possible consequences of that were going to be. And there was a picture in the Times this week of, I think, with downtown Damascus, which was war-torn, buildings bombed out. And I'm looking at this picture and I'm asking myself, from the perspective of an American, would I stay? If I had a family and wife and kids, would I stay or would I leave? And the answer quickly is that I would leave. So it's quite responsible for people to leave and try to go someplace where they're going to be treated better. And because that certainly wasn't happening in Syria. And the natural migration routes, if you look at a map, are going to be to come to Europe or to go further south into Jordan. And right now we know that Jordan has, 2 million refugees there?
Yeah.
So they don't have any room for these folks. They want to go someplace where they're going to have opportunities. And so it's created this huge crisis as the Europeans try to argue amongst themselves whom they're going to take, how many, what the conditions are going to be for those folks. And there's been no consensus on that.
Yeah. Well, I lived through something similar, not nearly as devastating as this is, in Central America during the 1980s when the civil wars were going on in El Salvador and Nicaragua. And people were leaving Nicaragua at the rate of 1,000 a week. And they were just leaving with the shirts on their back. They had nothing, just hoping they could find some way to get up here to the United States or get to Canada, risking everything because of the violence that was taking place in the country and also because of the economic situation, excuse me, where they were unable to just meet their basic needs in the country. So those countries are much smaller. What we have here are these huge family moving over, the huge population and the families moving over. And, I can't help but think okay, these people are fleeing from war. How many people are going to start to flee from the economic situation where they can't survive where they are and they've got to move on? So
same set of motivations, you know,
right,
to move, to go to some place where they think they have a better chance for
right,
themselves and their families.
That's right. That's right.
We should also point out that the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, the U.S.-UK invasion of Iraq, also generated a huge refugee crisis.
That's right.
And I think the estimate there was that some 4 million Iraqis were displaced, either internally within Iraq, or about 2 million of them, I think, also fled.
Yeah.
And so again, Jordan absorbed an awful lot of those. So add to the Iraqi refugees now, the refugees fleeing the unsafe conditions in Syria. And I think it's important to zero in on the Iraq War for another reason, and that's really the precipitating factor in unraveling the Middle East. Not that there weren't already problems throughout the Middle East, but the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which was meant to be a cakewalk, right? The neocons in the Bush administration who planned this war thought that this was going to be a cakewalk. It would promote democracy. We'd be welcomed. You know, all of those claims that were made that were so unrealistic to begin with. And of course, we know now all have been proven to be completely and utterly false. And the rationale for going in, of course, was completely and utterly false. But that was the start of the unraveling that has led to the current situation.
That's right.
And if we want to talk about the presence of ISIS or the Islamic State, it can be attributed directly to the U.S. invasion of Iraq. ISIS is basically a group of Sunni Muslims who are fleeing from Iraq or fighting back against the Shiites who control Iraq right now. And of course, the Shiites also control Syria. And so it's sort of a double whammy. You've got these various Sunni rebel forces that are fighting both against the Iraqi government as well as trying to overthrow Assad.
Yeah.
And of course, our efforts to intervene are so clumsy and ham-handed that we always tend to make the situation worse, aggravate the conditions there, and so now we're generating this massive civil war in Syria, in addition to all the other fighting that's going on, and also our efforts to try to isolate Iran, another major Shiite force in the region.
Yeah.
And of course, who's over there fighting ISIS on the front line more than Iran, right? Which gets totally overlooked in our discussion about how Iran is fomenting so much trouble. If you listen to the Republican debate the other night, you'd think Iran was the worst actor in the entire world. So again, the politics of the Middle East are very fragmented, and of course it's been the U.S. involvement, to say nothing of the previous European colonial presence. I mean, if we go way back, particularly at the end of the First World War, and we see the, again, very heavy-handed effort by the colonial powers, particularly the British at that time, to redraw the map of the Middle East to create.
And in a very arbitrary way.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
regardless of borders, regardless of ethnic or religious groups that were living in those territories, they just carved that line up to meet their needs.
Without any recognition of the historic Sunni Shiite schism and the way in which that would be aggravating the situation. So if we want to talk about what's behind the crisis, you know, we always want to jump right ahead to the crisis and talk about the people fleeing, but really without examining why is it that this civil war has been undertaken. Why is it that so many people feel the need to desperately get out of a situation where they feel unsafe, where they're fleeing violence? And of course, increasingly, the economy of the region has been devastated, as you mentioned, Don, so that so many people, just to survive, need to leave as well.
And I think, Ron, when you do that and you look at the historical piece of it, that really points to the complexity. There's no simple answer to all this thing. It's so complex. And that's the thing that struck me in the Republican debate the other night. Their whole answer is, we're going to bomb, we're strong, we got all these weapons, we're going to go in there and bomb. That would probably solve nothing at all, and we would still have all these problems. We would create more problems.
Well, we've had a dry run of that in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and that didn't work too well for us. We put 150,000 troops on the ground. That didn't work real well for us.
No,
We're still
exactly.
trying to extricate ourselves from those two theaters of war. What, 10 years later?
Yeah.
With no clear victory in either country.
War is not the answer. I mean, that's pretty clear. Yeah. I think too about what our efforts to train people to fight against ISIS in this situation, and we spent $500 million. You heard the hearings this week before Congress, and they said, well, okay, we spent $500 million on this. How many fighters do we have in the field now? And the general said, well, it was a small number, 5. But I mean, these are crazy answers. These are not the answers to the problem. Problems have to be much deeper, and they have to be international. It can't just be something that the United States decides. It's got to be an international solution. So when the Republicans say, we don't talk to Iran, we don't talk to Putin, we don't talk to any of these people, that's a dead end. We're never going to solve it unless we do.
We just loudly tell them what they are supposed to do, and then they do it, right? I mean, doesn't that seem to be the Republican strategy or the strategy of all these candidates? We're the United States. We yell at you and tell you what you're supposed to do, and then you automatically do what we say. And if you don't, then we interject military force and we force you to do what we want you to do. And of course, that's produced one disaster after another.
Right.
That's been the strategy since 2003.
Well, going all the way back to Vietnam. If you
Absolutely.
want to look at it that way.
Yeah, that's right.
Our history of those types of interventions have not worked out particularly well for us.
Yeah, I mean, until we recognize that we have to do something to the United Nations, I believe that's the only way that we can actually get to some kind of a solution where we have an international group of people who come together and begin to look at this complex situation and begin to make some strides forward. But just to throw more money at the military is just not even close.
I mean, if you look at history, you know that the Romans got themselves in trouble by the same philosophy of overreach.
Overexpand.
Tried to extend their empire much further than they had the capability of being able to maintain, and it ended up costing them.
Yes.
And you would think we would learn from those lessons of history, but obviously we haven't learned that lesson yet.
Not at all.
And we tend to blunder into these situations without any real clear understanding of the forces that are at play, right? So if we demand that Assad has to go in Syria,
Right.
okay, well, who's going to replace
What's
Assad?
what's next?
What's next? So it's going to be a Sunni group, right? Either Al-Qaeda, right? So here we are in the strange position of saying, well, Assad's got to go. ISIS is our mortal enemy, so therefore let's arm the moderate Sunnis, which tends to be Al-Qaeda right now, right? And so we're basically saying we want Al-Qaeda to take over, or an offshoot of Al-Qaeda to take over in Syria.
Makes
and
no
when we
sense.
blundered into Iraq, right? So we get rid of Saddam Hussein, a Sunni strongman basically, and we allow for a Shiite government to emerge, which then clearly is going to align itself with the Shiite government in Iran. So what do? We strengthened Iran enormously by knocking out Saddam Hussein and replacing him with a Shiite government, which then of course generated the Sunni awakening and the response that eventually leads to ISIS. And so we blunder into these situations and we don't really have a clear understanding of the history of the region, the culture of the
We don't
region.
understand the politics on the ground.
Right.
I don't think
Politics on the ground.
George W. Bush even knew the distinction between Sunnis
Shiite.
and Shiites,
No.
right? And so, but we think that if we can simply go over there and yell loudly and assert military power, that everything will fall into line. And again, that's just not going to happen.
And the short-term thinking, Libya, for example.
Yep.
Okay, we got rid of Gaddafi. They got rid of Gaddafi. We backed the people getting rid of Gaddafi. But there was nothing in place about what comes next. And this is the same thing we're going to be facing here.
And now, and the whole country disintegrated.
Yeah,
basically.
the whole country just
It's a failed state right
Yep.
now.
Yep. And adding to the refugee crisis,
Yeah.
tremendously to the refugee crisis, yeah. Yeah, a bright spot, if there is any kind of a bright spot, has been Germany, I think, in their willingness to take people and to resettle them. And they have their own personal reasons for that because they have a population shortage there, they need more workers. But I'm sure that's a big piece of it, but it's also, I think, their feelings about their responsibilities after the Second World War, and they have to get back in that, yeah. To me, I was shocked at the brutality at which the refugees have been treated,
Especially
particularly
in
in
Hungary.
Hungary
Yeah.
was the worst. Wow, the complete lack of the basic humanity that they profess. It just shows you, wow.
You know, the work that I do in diversity and inclusion, that's the type of conversation we have. Just how inclusive are some of these societies? And what we're finding out in a place like Hungary is not very inclusive, not very hospitable to people who don't look like them.
Right. And Poland coming out and saying, we'll take the Christians, you know.
Yeah.
Not just the Christians, we're going to take the Christians?
Well, the Hungarian president, Viktor Orban, is really a kind of a right-wing fanatic also. And he made some comments last week about how the refugees are threatening the Christian basis of Europe, right? And again, I think the whole way in which Hungary has responded, with the brutality that they have, goes right back to the top, and that kind of xenophobic attitude that their political leaders tend to have.
Yeah.
And given their history with the Russians, that it sort of surprises me. The way the Russians treated them as as a satellite state after World War II.
Yeah.
You would think that they would have learned some lessons from that about trying to be more open and inclusive, but obviously that's not the case.
You would think the Israelis would have learned that too, and they don't learn it at all. No.
But this is not a new situation. As you all know, I can remember in 2009, that fall, I went to a conference in Malta, which is a tiny Mediterranean island. It's a member of the European Union, and I was there for this conference and talked to some of the native Maltese, and there was some discussion of the Maltese Navy, which isn't very big, as you can imagine. It's a tiny little island, but the main function of the Maltese Navy was to basically keep people from coming from Northern Africa over. I mean, in a sense, Malta is very close to Northern Africa, and it's, between Northern Africa and Italy. And so if you had people fleeing Northern Africa for whatever reason, whether it had to do with climate change or the civil wars or economic desperation, they were crossing. So their job was to intercept these people and hold them and make sure that they would go back and not make it over to Italy. Now, obviously, the Maltese Army or Maltese Navy will be overwhelmed by these kind of numbers. And of course, Italy and Greece are really on the front line of the folks that are coming over, and then Hungary, of course. And today I read even how some of the refugees are now trying to go through Croatia and then go up that way. And
I heard that Croatia was closing too.
Yeah,
that they were closing their lines.
If we put this in perspective, and we talked about this before we went online here, I think it was between 50 and 60 million people in Europe were displaced during World War II.
Unbelievable.
People who had to move from their native countries to someplace else, most of whom did not go back home because you had that Iron Curtain after World War II. So this is not, like Ron said, this is not a new phenomenon, this sort of migration. It's not something new, even in Europe.
Yeah, not something new. And the answer has been military, and we're all going to build walls. We're all going to build walls. Walls are not going to make it. It's not going to do it. There has to be a much deeper answer to this whole thing.
Well, what we get generally then, if in places like Hungary right now, and I think that the tendency is going to be in a lot of other places to respond in a very militarized way. Christian Parente in that wonderful book, Tropic of Chaos, where he was looking at the impact of climate change and how that was generating large numbers of refugees. And he basically said, look, what the first response generally is the militaristic response. He called it the politics of the armed lifeboat, right? So, okay, you people are fleeing economic conditions and you're fleeing war. We're okay. We're already set over here on our lifeboat. You want to get in and be safe, but you ain't coming in here, right? And we're going to keep you out with military force. And so what Parente is worried about is that long term, with the climate crisis increasing, climate instability increasing, we're going to have more and more and more refugees. And is this how the North is going to
welfare
respond?
countries, yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
going to be the politics of the armed lifeboat all across Europe and the North?
So there are going to be more 3-year-old kids washing up on beaches
Sure.
as a result
Yeah.
of those types of policies.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
So is there a way to respond in a more just and progressive way? And so maybe
and I think Don hit it on it. The Germans are trying to orchestrate a plan for some equitable division of these refugees among the rest of the countries in Europe, and that's where they've hit a stone wall.
Yeah.
They're like, we need to be orderly about this. We know how many refugees there are. Let's figure out a way to divide them up amongst these countries, because it's our obligation to do this.
Right. Now, Britain has been very much not wanting to do much at all, as are we. But with Jeremy Corbyn, now the Labour Party leader, right? Is that his name, Jeremy Corbyn?
it's Corbyn.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a much different attitude towards this, you know? And he's got a much broader understanding. I mean, after he delivered his acceptance speech to be head of the Labour Party, he immediately went to a welcoming rally for refugees coming into the country. So, I mean, he's looking at things in a different way and our basic humanity and having to work out of that. At the same time, his voice is being heard. The other side, the right-wingers, are moving up and getting a considerable following.
Yep.
So it's building towards some kind of a crisis here in terms of both sides saying, okay, how are we going to resolve this? I don't know. That remark yesterday, I'm sure you saw at the rally for Trump. I don't know if you saw that. Trump was in New Hampshire yesterday. A guy got up in the audience and said, we have to get rid of the Muslims. They're having camps here and they're trying to kill us. And Obama's a Muslim and we got to get rid of him. And he wasn't even born here. And people clap. And Trump just goes on with his talk. Like, okay, yeah, we got to deal with some of that stuff.
we got to look into that.
We got to look into that.
I'll look into that. We'll look into that, yeah.
I mean, but that's the other side. That's these people that believe, hey, we got to stop these people. And that's what's manifesting
Whole
itself.
nationalistic, jingoistic.
Absolutely.
Kind
The
of,
xenophobia that you were talking about before, the jingoistic stuff, yeah.
Now, Obama said something last week about the United States taking in 10,000 of the Syrian refugees. Obviously, a very small drop in the bucket, and the British have been very reluctant to be welcoming and accepting. France, I think, has been pretty much the same way. Germany's really the only
right.
European country that has stepped up, and but again, it can't just be Germany, and there has to be some kind of cooperation across the European Union if this is going to be resolved in any way other than in a militarized, armed lifeboat, to a brutal, repressive way. I mean, essentially, there has to be some kind of long-term, cooperative, globally responsible way to handle these refugees.
And who's going to orchestrate that?
Again, to me, it has to come from international institutions.
That's what I
the
think.
European Union is one aspect of that, but I think the UN has to take a leading role here. Why was the UN created in the first place, if not
to
to
deal with these
resolve
types of issues.
threats to world peace and security?
Yeah.
If this isn't a threat to world peace and security, I don't know what is. And that's what the United Nations was formed to respond to, so that we wouldn't have wars, right? I mean, never again war, no war.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the whole mantra of the United Nations. We just came through this basically 30-year period of global warfare, and we can't ever have that happen again. So the United Nations mandate, its mission is to intervene and deal with these threats to peace and security. Now, it hasn't worked out that well. As we know, the Security Council of the United Nations is a very undemocratic institution, and that the 5 permanent members, as I think we've discussed before on this program, hold the veto power.
Yeah.
And so throughout the history of the United Nations, whenever, especially during the Cold War, whenever either the United States or the Soviet Union didn't want an issue to be dealt with, then of course they vetoed it. And the United States continues to block actions that are threatening to the geopolitical and economic interests of the United States through the veto power. So the United Nations has not functioned in the way in which it was envisioned. But still, it seems to me that if we're going to have any hope for, again, this long-term cooperative, globally responsible response, it has to come through an international organization like that.
I totally agree with that. And I think that moving towards strengthening those organizations is the way we have to go. That is totally alien to the Republicans and the right wing in this country. They would like us to withdraw from the United Nations rather than be a part of this. But I think that's the only solution.
Go back to isolationist policy.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
One of the things that has fascinated with me about this whole debate and issue is that if you go back 500 years and look at the history of colonialism in these very same regions where most of the countries from the north came down to these countries and basically had their way for hundreds and hundreds of years,
Yeah.
and now
Yeah.
the very descendants of these countries that they colonized are coming back,
Yes.
and it's an issue that they can't turn away from. You can't run away from it.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
we don't
That's
have
right.
We don't have the luxury now to be able to build walls, and if anything, we know this issue has taught us that we can't build walls. They're not going to work. People are going to
won't
find
solve
a way to get in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're gonna find
so
a
what
way.
we're saying is that Europe, the North in general, has a moral and political responsibility to these refugees.
Right.
The fault lies not with the refugees. The fault lies with the European colonial past and the current clumsy military interventions by the United States in the Middle East that have generated some of these crises. So we can't be blaming the victims here. We have a tendency to blame the victims, don't
Yeah.
we? It's the refugees. Why are they trying to come over here and get what we've got, right?
Yeah.
Why don't they stay back there where they're supposed to be, right? And we're going to keep them out in any way that we can. But again, I think the argument is that Europe does have a moral and political obligation and responsibility to somehow create a policy to deal with the refugee crisis.
And I'm wondering if the Pope Francis, with his speaking out in favor of the refugees and telling Catholics, you got to take one of these guys in your home. You got to do this. All these Catholic religious orders, you got to move into these guys. I mean, he could be the catalyst, I think, for the moral responsibility. I mean, I'm struck also by the number of, like in Germany, where the German people came out and welcomed the folks and bought them clothes, bought them other, and in other countries too. So there's a lot of goodwill out there to build on. But I think what's happened is that the people who have power have pushed their way to the front and are hearing these voices. Maybe the trick would be to get these other voices heard and more of those voices.
Well, I think it'll be very interesting to listen carefully to what Pope Francis has to say when he addresses the United Nations.
Yes.
He's going to address a joint session of Congress. He's going to also speak to the United Nations. I'm willing to bet that the key theme in his address to the United Nations is going to be the refugee crisis. And if we're investing some hopes in the United Nations, which may seem to be a vain hope given the dismal past performances, but maybe someone that has the moral stature of the Pope coming directly to the United Nations and addressing this issue in the forthright way he tends to address most of the issues that he deals with, including climate change, that might be one factor that would push us toward this kind of policy that we think is necessary.
I think it's such an important week next week when he comes.
It's a huge week.
In terms of this issue, in terms of climate change, and in terms of economic justice. He's got an opportunity here because the focus of the world is going to be on him. And I think he could be the focal point of other people joining and saying, that's right. And that's the whole hope of nonviolent direct action, that we could do that.
So not only his address to the United Nations, but what he says to Congress.
Absolutely.
That's going to be fascinating to watch and
man.
to see how the Republican Party in Congress is going to respond to the Pope. They can't just automatically diss him, all right? But he's going to have some really tough things to say to them. And so they're going to be in a quandary, I think, in terms of how to respond, because they don't want to deal with the issues he's going to raise, and they clearly disagree with his political position. and they see him as a threat, I think, to their long-term policies. But they can't just outright dismiss him,
That's right.
Like they can do
That's
with
right.
Obama, right?
Yeah.
He's a Muslim. He's not, I mean, whatever. He's an apprentice. Did you hear Scott Walker during the debate?
Oh.
Saying, he's trying to be cute.
We have an apprentice in a way.
And refer to Trump's program that he did, The Apprentice. And of course he meant Trump, we don't need an apprentice in the White House. We already have one. Well, I don't know how you can refer to somebody who's in the second term in the presidency as an apprentice, if you ever could in the first place.
I think Walker's a little bit desperate because he hasn't ascended to where he thought he would be right now.
Sinking like a stone.
Yeah.
Surprising to me, because he had a lot of money behind him too.
But let's continue focusing on the Republican candidates because certainly one of the most important issues that they're addressing is the issue of undocumenteds in the United States, and the whole notion that we've got to now it's focus on the U.S.-Mexican border for the most part. Although what Walker had the cockamamie scheme of building a wall between the United States and Canada also. But let's leave that one alone for the moment. But let's look at Trump, because that seems to be the signature card of the Donald Trump campaign. That seems to be how he rose to the position that he's in, to be the leading contender right now among the vast number of Republicans that are running for the presidency. And Trump usually has almost no specifics to offer on anything, right?
No.
If you watched the debate the other night, Trump never offers a single specific on anything, except on the immigration issue. He's got two specifics. One, he's going to build a complete wall between the United States and Mexico, right? And he's going to round up all 11 million undocumenteds in the United States and deport them.
They have to go. That's what he
Load
said.
them up on trains.
Yeah.
A modern day Trail of Tears.
Oh my God. Well, hey, very good analysis. Yeah, the Trail of Tears with the Native Americans, right, coming out over to the south, over to Oklahoma.
And we know from a statistical standpoint that migration into the U.S. from Mexico is basically at zero, and has been for the last several years. Actually, there are more people leaving the country to go back south than there are coming over here.
Wow.
So that existential threat that he talks about is not really there, but it makes a great soundbite.
Yeah, right.
And he sounds a bit like the Prime Minister of Hungary, because he's appealing to that same audience, that same gut feeling that people think that they're going to be overrun by people who don't look like them or are different from them. And that's
Hateful, anti-immigrant, ideological, racist statements is what I think we could characterize Trump's statements on immigration.
Absolutely.
And the idea that not only do we have to get rid of all these people and that they're coming over in hordes, but that they are mostly bad people, right?
Yeah.
That the people coming are murderers and rapists and bringing diseases again, the Republican candidates don't let reality get in the way of their sound bites and their statements. I mean, if you watched the debate the other night, almost every statement that was uttered by one of those Republican candidates was complete nonsense. I mean, empirically, they were wrong on just about everything. They have no connection to reality.
Don't let the facts get in the way of
No.
story.
They never let the facts get in the way, and they never have their facts straight. It's just unbelievable that candidate after candidate can make statements that are complete variance with reality.
And I'll give you an example of recently in the paper with Mike Huckabee making the comment of that Dred Scott was still in effect, and had to be corrected by the radio commentator. Like, no, that's not the case. That was nullified
by the 14th Amendment.
13th and 14th Amendment
in 1868.
Yeah. But he ran with that statement.
Right. There's no effort to try to get.
Just as a criminologist, I just want to respond to one of the statements that Trump has made is that many of the undocumented that come in commit lots of crimes, and that's simple nonsense. There's no evidence whatsoever to support that. In fact, they probably have far lower crime rates than any other grouping within the United States that we want to focus on. They do not commit large numbers of crime. There might be an isolated incident here or there that they can, of course, seize upon and try to generalize to everybody else.
Sure.
But overall, And criminologists have looked at this issue, and there is no large number of crimes being committed by migrants coming in from Mexico.
They're coming here
It's a
because
myth.
they can't survive economically where they live.
Yeah.
And they are trying to find a way. And they're strong family values. They stick together very well. They're hard workers. Everybody agrees that they are. And these people that have been here for years and worked and built a life, just to even think about sending them back is completely, everything you said, Ron, totally immoral and just the thing that bothers me the most is the following that they get.
Yeah.
The fact that so many people resonate with what they say and agree and say, yeah, we got to do this. We got to get rid of them. It's diversity, it's individualism and materialism. And this is ours and we built it and we don't have any responsibility to anybody else. And we don't want anybody that's different from us doing these things. That resonates here with so many people, which the Republicans spoke to that in every term they had the other night.
I mean, it was the same mentality that allowed us to intern the Japanese during World War II.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
Blow these people up, take them off their land, strip them of all their property and their possessions, and put them in concentration camps during World War II. And the Supreme Court basically affirmed that in the Korematsu case. So that was okay to do. But it's that same mentality. This will keep us safe.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of embracing diversity and saying, how can we build this thing together? Yeah, yeah.
It's always focusing and pushing the hot button of fear.
Exactly.
And that has always been a central element of right-wing politics in the United States and elsewhere, is the fear of the other. And give me your political support because you're afraid, and I'm stroking your fear. So give me the political power, and I'll protect you. I'll keep those people away from you. I'll protect you from the other. And that plays out in Europe right now, and it plays out, of course, here. I don't know if you noticed during the debate, almost every single one of the Republican candidates talked about a secure border. We have to secure the border.
Yeah.
So every time they came to them with their comments about immigration, the first thing that pops out of their mouth is, we've got to secure the border. We've got to secure the border. Well, what constitutes a secure border, right? Is it having this mammoth wall, which would be impossible to build in the first place? And is not the border already heavily militarized? I mean, if you look at the Department of Homeland Security, in their fiscal year 2015 budget, $13 billion went to the Customs and Border Patrol.
Oh my
$13 billion, and that's up from about $15 billion 10 years ago. The Customs and Border Patrol has about 20,000 agents, and that makes it the largest uniformed law enforcement agency at the federal level. The border is already heavily militarized. We have drones, we have watchtowers, we have people on horseback and ATVs. There already are fences. I mean, already we have a massive investment
But I
in
think some
trying to
people's
secure the
ideal
border.
of a secure border is what they had in Berlin between East Germany and West Germany. So people can see barbed wire and machine gun nests and people getting killed. Then they have, oh, now it's safe, because this is the cost that people would have to pay in order to get to the other side. That's their conception of what a secure border would look like.
I think you're
And
right.
and it's very troubling.
Whew, very troubling. Yeah. The border's probably never been safer than they have now. They're better and more secure than they've ever been in the history of the country, right? And as you said, the rate is completely declining, and demonizing the people makes people more afraid all the time. Yeah, and we see them in the community, people that are undocumented, that are out there working every single day, taking care of their families, not causing any trouble in the community. Why would you want to throw these people out?
What would happen to the American economy if Donald Trump was able to successfully round up 11 million undocumented people and send them back to Mexico or elsewhere in Latin America? what would happen to the U.S. economy?
I can tell you what, you'd probably be paying about $5 for an apple.
I think you're right. Exactly. A lot of jobs wouldn't be done.
Yeah, a lot of jobs would not be done. Because if Americans wanted those jobs, generationally speaking, they would have had them already.
Yeah.
There would have been no jobs for these folks to come to get.
Exactly.
But those are jobs we don't want to do.
No.
I mean, you figure during slavery, people were picking cotton. And they were picking cotton wearing chains and at gunpoint. Why? Because they couldn't get anybody else to do that kind of work for free.
Exactly. Yep. Right.
So no, Americans don't want those jobs.
No.
And
No.
so it would be a tremendous cost to the economy.
Jeez. Yeah.
And again, just a civil liberties nightmare to think, how would you carry this out? I mean, how would you identify, as we
Yeah,
said
how do you
earlier,
figure out
how
who
would
was who?
you arrest and
Oh.
process, and would you provide any kind of due process? Because obviously, if you attempted a wholesale roundup of undocumented, you're going to pull in a lot of people who are legally in the United States, people who are United States citizens at the same time. So how are you going to sort through all of that? I mean, are we going to create massive new court processes where are we going to have to beef up are we going to have to bring the U.S. military? I mean, again, obviously this is just a
the
complete
money
pipe
that is
dream.
be wasted on something like that when we have such needs of people in this country.
Think about it, we got a snapshot of that this week. We couldn't even figure out a 14-year-old school kid who brings a clock to school whether or not he was a terrorist, when clearly he wasn't. So if we make a mistake there, imagine what
Right.
kind of mistakes we'd make if we did this massive roundup trying to figure out who's who and deport people.
And the waste
Yeah.
of not only money, but of these people are great resources for our country. How many of these people are already contributing tremendously to
taxes.
the economy? Paying taxes, very smart people who get through school and or could contribute to everything. Yeah, it's just crazy. How about Dr. Carson's response, his plan? Remember his plan? What he said is, okay, we're going to take those 11 million people and we're going to say, okay, if you work on farms for the next 6 weeks, work on farms is what he said, for the next 6 months, you will be guest workers, and then we would allow you to apply for something that would enable you to be visitors here, and then maybe down the line we might allow you to come. We'll make these people go out and work on farms. Please. That's not too far from slavery,
it's
you
a
know?
fantasy
Not too
world,
far
yeah.
from slavery.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, there has to be some kind of path to legal status, to citizenship for most of the undocumented. Even Ronald Reagan said that.
Yeah.
I mean, they all want to celebrate St. Ronnie, but they certainly don't advocate some of the policies that Reagan himself pursued.
Yeah.
In terms of tax increases or his efforts to work with Gorbachev to
Absolutely.
reduce nuclear
Yeah.
weapons, or again to say that there had to be a path to legal citizenship for undocumenteds in the United States. And
Absolutely, there has to be.
so that sort of gets completely pushed off because Trump makes such an extremist statement and issue out of it. Then all the others who might have had a more moderate stance at one point, like Jeb Bush,
Marco Rubio.
both of them have connections to the Hispanic community, obviously. But now they're forced, because they need to show that they're strong. They can't let Trump outdo them on this issue. Now they have to take more extreme positions.
Yeah.
And so the distortion, Trump introduces this distortion that pulls everything to the extreme right on this particular issue.
Yeah, and so not one of them comes up with a different solution because of the constituency out there. That they know that they can't displease those people, and so they embrace it and they trip all over themselves. Rubio was pathetic, watching Rubio try to say there's something that can be done for these people, but not wanting to offend, not wanting to say, well, Trump is completely wrong and we have to.
Yeah, because he knows that next set of primaries, when they move out of the North, go to South Carolina.
Yeah,
So he's speaking to that audience.
yeah. They don't speak about their convictions. They just speak about what's going
It's
to be.
all calculated.
Yeah.
And one of the other issues that's come up is this whole very offensive concept of anchor babies. And
jeez.
focusing on the whole issue of birthright citizenship, which also is a part of the 14th Amendment.
Yes.
It was the 14th Amendment. There was a series of amendments passed after the Civil War. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. The 14th Amendment provided citizenship and provided due process and equal protection of the laws. And the 15th Amendment opened up a process for voting for African Americans, the freed slaves. And so now, so the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868. And the birthright citizenship part of the 14th Amendment makes no mention of race.
No.
I mean, it was intended to provide citizenship for the freed slaves, but it was a broader principle that was being applied. If you are born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States. And there aren't that many other countries in the world that have birthright citizenship. Right. And it's one of the things that made America exceptional at one point, right? That we were welcoming, that, again, we were providing citizenship for those that were born here. And so now you have these people on the Republican right arguing that we ought to get rid of birthright citizenship, to dismantle one of the key features of the 14th Amendment, which the Republican Party passed back in 1868 for the most part, right?
And how ironic it is that a country like ours, which is a nation of immigrants and migrants, would want to close its borders down to people who want to come here for the same reasons that most of those folks' ancestors came here for. It's just ironic.
It's so ironic. My grandparents came here as immigrants from Germany in the early 1900s with nothing and built a life here. And I think that was great that they were able to do that. And I want other people to have that same kind of an opportunity.
Because they contribute to the society and always have historically.
Yes.
Far more than than the dark side.
Exactly. It's tough.
So I wonder if Pope Francis will make any comments about the Republican Party position on immigration when he's here. As we're hoping that he'll address the issue at the United Nations about the refugee crisis in Europe. We wonder if he'll make some statement about that when he's making his joint address to the Congress.
I would like to think that he will.
I believe he will.
He has not shied away from taking on any hot-button issues.
No, and being from Latin America himself, I think he's going to really identify with those people and say something, as well as the European refugee thing. Yeah, I certainly believe he will.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to let anybody off the hook here.
No.
And I'm certainly hopeful that the issue of climate change will come up.
It has to.
I mean, the recent encyclical that he produced focused a lot of attention on this issue. And the Pope has this great moral authority, and he's now lending it to this particular issue. And so I'm hopeful that this is going to be something that he'll broach at the address to Congress.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure, and the UN has to be at the UN with the Paris coming up.
So if we look at the Republican debate from the other night, did the issue of climate change, I mean, it came up like as a blip.
It was completely off the table. Yeah. It wasn't anything we should be concerned about.
Personal shots and all that sort of stuff. Nothing on climate change, nothing on inequality, nothing
Poverty.
on race, nothing on gender equity. None of those issues came up.
Exactly. No, they're not on their agenda. They're not important. The people that they deal with are just not those people. They're just not those people that have anything else. They're just the people that already got money. And they're the ones that they're trying to please and get their donations and stuff from them. And then the people that they've brainwashed in the middle class, that we are the only, we're here fighting for all these other people, and we got to keep what's ours, and they're all attacking us. Such a painful. Thank God for Bernie. I mean, at least Bernie's talking about all these issues very clearly. I loved it. His address at Liberty College this week. I thought that was so good.
It took a lot of guts on his part, and I give him a high degree of praise for doing that because he knew he was going into hostile territory.
Yeah. And I love the way he started. He says, I understand that you feel very, very strongly about some of these issues here, and we are going to disagree on that. But I want to talk about an issue that I think we might be able to find common ground. That's poverty and inequality. What a wonderful way to frame it. Let's talk about something that we could. He wasn't going to cater to them and say, well, you guys got a point. And no, he said, we're disagreeing on those things. Yeah, I thought that was great.
And Bernie has now pulled ahead of Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire and also in Iowa.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So, again, we don't have time on this particular program probably to get into this, but the Democratic race is becoming increasingly interesting as well.
Yes.
And as we talked about on our last show, we didn't think that Joe Biden was going to jump in. And I don't know if you guys saw Biden's interview on Stephen Colbert.
So a part of that,
late
yeah.
night with Stephen Colbert. And so even more so after that, I'm inclined to think that he's not going to do it. But who knows? I mean,
Back and forth. One day it seems like clearly he's not getting into it.
and then other days, I
Other
mean, I think he's
days-
getting a lot of pressure. I think people are getting very nervous that Bernie Sanders is doing so well against Hillary Clinton, and so I think there's going to be a lot more pressure put on Biden to get into the race at some point.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen with the Sanders candidacy now? I mean, now that he's taken the lead in both New Hampshire and Iowa, and that's obviously where you first have to invest your resources, now he's already looking ahead to Super Tuesday. And he's trying to create organizations, and he's got a call out for volunteers and staff in all of the, there's like, 10 or so states that are going to be in play on that Super Tuesday. And so now he's trying to assemble an even stronger kind of campaign to go forward, which maybe he didn't even anticipate.
No,
would
I'm
be-
sure he didn't anticipate.
Am I going to be at that point where I'm going to be in a position to participate and contend in those states? And now clearly he is. So,
Well, just like Trump strikes a chord with the people that are, feeling the individualism and the materialism and the isolation. Bernie struck a chord with a lot of people who believe they're right, believe that he's right in what he's talking about, and that we should be moving towards that. So, I mean, I think that he has accomplished what we need. The debate is on the table now, and that's what I think is really, really important.
Bernie was on Rachel Maddow's show last night, and one of the things that she asked him is, do you think that given the extremism of the current Republican field, do you think that there are a lot of more moderate conservatives or moderate Republicans that might be attracted to your campaign? And he seemed to think that that might be happening, that he is starting to get some of that support. So, there could be a real wild card thrown in here.
Yeah.
Because there's a core group of Republicans who cannot wrap their heads around the vision of a possible Donald Trump presidency. It just doesn't
That's
sit
true.
well with them.
That's absolutely true. That's right.
And none of the expected frontrunners are gaining any traction whatsoever. It's all Trump and Carson, and now Carly Fiorina is also assuming to make a little bit of a move. All the people who are the outsiders, in a sense, to the political scene.
Interesting column in the Times that I started reading before I came here today on that David Brooks wrote about Carly Fiorina and Marco Rubio.
Well, I didn't read it yet.
Yeah, as a possible presidential ticket,
Wow.
You want to take a look at that,
Yeah. I will.
David Brooks wrote the column in the New York Times.
Interesting guy.
Wow.
I see he's going to be speaking out here in Holland. At,
David Brooks is?
Hope College. David Brooks, yeah. He's interesting because, I mean, he goes back and forth.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, wow, he's right with him, and then other times disagree. But he's perceptive. He sees things that I don't usually look at. So.
All right, well, we only have a couple of minutes left here, and I did want to make sure that we announced a speaker that's coming to the Kalamazoo area on Sunday, September 27th. This is going to be at Western Michigan University in the Bernhardt Center, room 211, starting at 7 o'clock. It's a free public talk and discussion with Nora Barrows Friedman, and she is the author of the book In Our Power, U.S. Students Organized for Justice in Palestine. And this book just came out, and she's also the associate editor of the electronic Infantata. She's published widely on the issue of Palestine and on student activism around equal rights and justice for the Palestinian people for a variety of publications. She was also the senior producer and co-host of a program called Flashpoints, which was an investigative radio program broadcast by Pacifica News. She has traveled to Palestine on a regular basis as a reporter, and again, she'll be in Kalamazoo on Sunday, September 27th, 7 o'clock at the Bernhardt Center, room 211, and again, her talk is titled In Our Power, U.S. students organized for justice in Palestine. The event is sponsored by Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War, Healing Children of Conflict, and a number of other peace and justice groups here in West Michigan. And so we're hoping that people will take advantage of that opportunity. One of the nice things about our community is that we do have so many active groups dealing with so many of the different issues that are of importance in our world today. And Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War is one of the leading groups, constantly focusing attention on the issues of war and militarism and conflict in the Middle East, and striving to present authors and speakers that can give us some insight and perspective on what's happening in various parts of the world, and trying to push us toward moving forward for peaceful and just solutions to these critical problems.
Right.
And we know that's certainly not what goes on in the political realm, as we were just talking about. Even among our Democratic candidates, often the discussion is pretty truncated about using peace and justice, adopting peace and justice as a path forward in these areas of conflict. So we also, the issue of climate change, which we continually reference on this program, we have a wonderful group up at the university, which is the working group on climate change. It's an interdisciplinary group trying to focus attention on this issue. They've just created a new minor at Western.
Yep.
You can now minor in climate change studies at Western Michigan University. And this group has also been responsible for organizing all kinds of events in the community. We had a discussion of the Naomi Klein book, This Changes Everything, last spring. This group brought in the activist Bill McKibben, probably the foremost climate activist in the world today, the organizer of 350.org. And so again, it just provides an enormous opportunity for people in the Kalamazoo community to come out to these lectures, to learn about these critical issues, to think about alternative perspectives on them, which we try to offer on our program. And so we try to do our part here on critical issues, alternative views, but there are also many other opportunities like this one with Nora Barrows-Friedman coming up on September 27th. So, gentlemen, thank you again for your insights and your discussion. We'll be tackling more critical issues as we move forward, and we invite you to join us again on Critical Issues, Alternative Views. Thanks for joining us.